Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a massive global paradox. If you look at the modern Indian state of Kerala, you see human development indicators, things like high life expectancy, incredibly low infant mortality, and near universal literacy, that actually rival developed Western nations. But here's the catch. They've done all of this despite having a much lower economic income. So, how exactly did they pull that off? Well, that brings us to the core mystery of our explainer. Back in the late 19th century, the famous spiritual leader Swami Vivekananda visited Kerala, and he famously described it as a madhouse of castes. He used that term because of its incredibly rigid, severely oppressive social hierarchies. So you have to ask yourself, how on earth do you get from a literal madhouse of castes to India's most socially equitable state? Okay, let's dive into this. When you contrast 19th century segregation with the 21st century Kerala model, one thing becomes absolutely clear. Kerala's modern success isn't just the result of some contemporary bureaucracy or a couple of lucky government policies. No, it is a hard-won, 100-year structural inheritance built on relentless social revolts. And today, we are going to reverse engineer this model piece by piece. Section 1. Democratizing knowledge, breaking monopolies. Our first layer of reverse engineering starts with information. For centuries, knowledge and laws in Kerala were preserved on palm leaves, which were known as thaliola, and these were strictly, fiercely guarded by upper caste elites. Marginalized communities were actually legally banned from reading religious texts or even learning Sanskrit. But this massive monopoly shattered in 1821. A British missionary named Benjamin Bailey established the CMS Press down in Kottayam. Shifting power from elite palm leaves to democratized printed paper, that was a structural earthquake. Suddenly, books, dictionaries, and translated texts in simple Malayalam acted as a tangible anchor, allowing ordinary people to finally achieve literacy and legally challenge local landlords. Now, at the exact same time, you had female missionaries absolutely dismantling severe gender and caste barriers. Early conservative traditions heavily discouraged women's education. But missionaries like Martha Moltz and the Dawson family bypassed those traditions altogether by offering girls' boarding schools. And Martha Molt went a step further. She introduced European lace-making and embroidery. This established a cottage industry that gave marginalized women their own incomes for the very first time. Think about how game-changing that is. Education was suddenly paired directly with economic autonomy. Section 2. Reclaiming bodily autonomy. The fight for dignity. Because think about it. Before you can fight for political rights, you have to secure basic physical dignity. In 19th century Kerala, rigid orthodox laws dictated this incredibly harsh visual hierarchy. Lower caste women were legally prohibited from covering their upper bodies in public. It's shocking today, but this law was deliberately designed to weaponize clothing styles just to preserve the caste system. Naturally, this horrific oppression sparked the Chanar Revolt. And this wasn't a quick fix, it was a grueling half-century-long battle. Empowered by those early missionary schools we just talked about, women began defying state laws by wearing upper garments. This led to brutal backlash. We're talking widespread civil rioting and arson by Orthodox elites. Finally, after massive uprisings and direct intervention from the British governor of Madras, Maharaja Iliam Thirunal issued a definitive royal proclamation in 1859. This permanently abolished the restriction and granted lower caste women the absolute right to cover their upper bodies. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the immediate domino effect it triggered. Just 1 year later, in 1860, we see the Mukuthi agitation. Lower caste women were still forbidden from wearing valuable metal jewelry. Well, when an Ejava woman defiantly wore a gold nose stud, called a mukuthi, Orthodox men actually violently tore it from her face in public. Hearing about this, a wealthy Ejava chieftain and martial arts master named Vilayudha Panikkar launched a massive counterstrike. He went out, bought a huge quantity of gold, manufactured hundreds of gold nose studs literally overnight, distributed them to women, and armed his trained guards to march them right into the marketplace. Facing that kind of armed protection, nobody dared stop them. Section 3. Breaking spatial segregation, claiming space. So with bodily autonomy legally established, the battleground shifted to physical space. Public roads in late 19th century Travancore were treated as the exclusive private property of upper caste elites. Marginalized people were completely banned from walking on them. They were forced into muddy, hidden pathways just to avoid polluting the elites with their mere shadow. Meanwhile, the ultimate symbol of aristocratic status was the Vilavandi. which is a covered luxury bullock cart fitted with brass belts. Then, in 1893, an iconic social reformer named Ayang Kali launched a direct, physical assault on this spatial segregation. He secretly purchased one of those regal bullock carts, dressed himself up in the traditional attire of the ruling aristocracy, and drove directly onto the main, forbidden public highway. The tangible object of those brass bells chiming loudly, that was totally intentional. He wanted everyone to literally hear him coming, forcefully claiming the right to public infrastructure. When a mob naturally tried to stop him, a young Kali, who was a trained martial artist, drew his dagger, fought them off, and completed his historic journey. And Ayang Kali didn't stop at roads either. He moved right on to schools. In 1914, even though there was a government order allowing Dalit children into public schools, landlords violently blocked them. So what did Ayang Kali do? He took a 5-year-old Dalit girl named Panchami by the hand, marched straight past the protesters, and sat her right on a wooden classroom bench. The outrage from the Orthodox mob was so intense that they set the entire school on fire that night, simply to destroy the wooden bench she had sat on. So the crucial point is that polite petitions just weren't working against physical force. Realizing this, Ayang Kali launched a masterful economic counterstrike, organizing the very first agricultural labor strike in Indian history. He issued this exact chilling ultimatum: if our children are not allowed to study, weeds will grow in your agricultural fields. And they did it. The workers completely walked off the rice paddies, utterly paralyzing the agrarian economy. Just look at how these events compound on each other. You have the physical blockade of the school, followed immediately by this massive economic strike that pushed wealthy landlords to the brink of total financial ruin. This strike lasted nearly a whole year until the landlords and the royal government finally capitulated. In 1915, the state strictly enforced school admissions, making Panchami's burnt bench an enduring, powerful symbol of the absolute right to education.
Section 4. The Spiritual Revolution. Restructuring Society.
Now, physical and economic battles were really only part of the puzzle. We absolutely must look at the ideological core of this movement. At the center of it all was Srinarayana Guru. He basically engineered a profound spiritual restructuring of Kerala. His revolutionary philosophy was universal humanism, boiled down to one caste, one religion, one God for human. He urged marginalized communities to abandon superstitious rituals and focus heavily on modern education. And in a truly brilliant move in 1927, instead of installing a traditional idol in a temple, he installed a simple glass mirror. The profound message there: look within yourself to find the divine. This philosophy was so incredibly powerful that it even challenged Mahatma Gandhi himself. In a historic 1925 debate, Gandhi still held a somewhat romanticized view of the caste structure, known as Varnashrama. He believed different castes were natural, but that they should just be treated equally. Narayana Guru completely rejected that premise. He asked Gandhi if leaves on a single tree were fundamentally different. Gandhi said no, they're of the same essence. Narayana Guru masterfully countered that human beings are exactly like that. We might have different appearances, but we are one single species. This brilliant analogy fundamentally shifted Gandhi's entire approach to eradicating caste. And this spiritual equality fueled massive civic actions, most notably the Vaikam Satyagraha. For 604 days, volunteers protested in a relay for the right of marginalized castes to simply walk on the public roads surrounding the Vaikam temple. It was an incredibly organized effort. They used coordinated media warfare in newspapers to expose police brutality to the entire nation. Importantly, it also mobilized progressive upper caste allyship. There was a massive march called the Savarna Jatha, which proved once and for all that this was a collective, universal human rights issue. And this brilliantly illustrates the culmination of everything we've been talking about. From the Chinar Revolt in 1813 all the way to the Goravayar Satyagraha in 1931, you're looking at a full century of compounding pressure. By the mid-1930s, marginalized communities were openly threatening a mass exit from Hinduism entirely, which would have absolutely crippled the kingdom's political authority. This intense, organized threat forced the Maharaja to issue the Temple Entry Proclamation of 1936. In a single sentence, it legally erased centuries of spiritual apartheid. Section 5. Birth of a Modern State. The Kerala Model. All right, now we bring all these historical dominoes back to the present day. As you can see, the Kerala model is not a modern invention. From the 1820s democratization of knowledge through the printing press, to the fierce demand for public infrastructure through the Orthambalam school strike, to securing universal space access, these historical pathways directly birthed today's universal literacy and advanced healthcare. That deep cultural insistence on physical dignity evolved right into the modern decentralized public health network we see in Kerala today. Let's move to and see how this builds into the political reality of Kerala today. The defining feature of the 21st century Kerala model is its highly decentralized governance, where local village councils hold substantial, real power. This extreme decentralization is a direct product of those centuries of street agitations. It created a highly organized, politically conscious citizenry. They don't view state resources as some kind of royal charity. They view them as a fundamental, legally enforceable right. Which leaves us with a final, pretty heavy question. What is the true price of the public infrastructure and basic dignity we literally take for granted today? When we look at modern equality, we have to remember the burnt wooden benches, the torn gold studs, the printed dictionaries, and the massive, relentless sacrifices that quite literally built the foundation of human development. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the